Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. Durud be hamegi, and welcome to yet another edition of the IIEA webinars. Today's topic is energy subsidy reforms. My name is Valentine Moghadam. I am a professor of sociology and international affairs at Northeastern University here in Boston, and it is my pleasure to chair today's session. Ida Mirzai was scheduled to do so, but she was unable to join us at the last moment. Speaking of being unable to join us, we were scheduled to have two speakers, and Ali Mustafa was scheduled to join us from Tehran today to present his work on the illegal fuel trade. A very interesting paper, by the way. But he has taken ill and is unable to join us. But we are very pleased that Mohammadali Mokhtari is joining us from Switzerland and will be presenting his paper. And of course, you can see the first slide of his presentation. Let me just quickly introduce him. Mohammadali Mokhtari, or Ali Mokhtari, is an applied microeconomist at the University of Lugano in Switzerland, preparing to defend his doctoral dissertation at the Università della Svizzera Italiana. Terrible accent, I'm sure. By the way, Mr. Mokhtari, when are you scheduled to defend?
It's pretty close. It's in the maximum in the next spring.
Well, congratulations in advance.
Thank you so much.
He has research interests in health development and the Sustainable Development Goals. Bravo. Before joining Lugano in October 2019, he worked as a pre-doctoral researcher in the Development Economics Group within the Department of Economics at the University of Zurich. His presentation today is entitled "The Vital Role of Cash Transfers, Lessons from the Largest Energy Subsidy Reform in the Developing World." Of course, it's in Iran. This paper examines the effect of cash transfers on households that were impacted by the 2010 energy subsidy reforms in Iran, which provided monthly lump sum payments to Iranian citizens, although not the non-Iranian residents in Iran. He will be sharing his findings on income, poverty, and nutrition gaps, comparing cash and non-cash recipients. I had the pleasure of reading the paper. It's very instructive, very well documented, etc. And without further ado, I will give the floor over to Ali Mokhtari. But first, I just want to point out that he will be speaking for 20-25 minutes, after which we will open up the floor to Q&A, to your questions and answers. And then we wrap up. This is a 1-hour session. And we'll wrap up with maybe 1 or 2 announcements about future IIEA webinars. So without further ado, I hand it over to Mohammadali Mokhtari. Thank you for joining us, by the way.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for inviting me. This is a great pleasure to present this paper about energy subsidy reform, which I think absolutely is still important for the country and many countries in the Middle East and North Africa region. In this paper, we use the large energy subsidy in 2010 in Iran, and we investigate how is the role of cash transfer in protecting households during this large energy subsidy reform. As many of you may know, the reform transferred a huge amount of cash transfer to Iranian citizens, But nobody considered some non-Iranian in this literature that they never received this cash transfer. We show many evidence that first we show this 3% of population, this non-Iranian citizen, at the bottom of income and expenditure distribution experience large income gap, and the poverty rate among them increase. We showed these non-cash recipients are mostly the non-Iranian. Also, this income gap leads to nutrition gap, and also we detect some change in parental behavior that affect the children. We analyze the health data, a rich health data set, which include height and weight of children, and we find impact on the children that born during and after the reform. The magnitude of effect, this negative effect is larger for those born immediately after the reform. And more importantly, the counterfactual analysis show that if the reform doesn't include this cash transfer, it is very likely that Iranian experience similar income and poverty shock. We show evidence. We use rich health and household income data set. When we remove this cash transfer from balance sheet of household, we observe that many Iranians are likely to experience similar negative effect during the reform. Let's start from introduction. First, the motivation for this paper arises the point that we observed many public resistance and protests against this kind of reform. We can mention the Iranian protest in November 2019, when the third round of reform was not clear that include cash transfer or not, and who is eligible to receive this. The country experienced very large protest, unfortunately. Also in the literature, economic literature, there is lack of evidence regarding the role of this cash transfer in protecting low-income households. What happened exactly? Very briefly, in December 2010, Iran underwent this most extensive subsidy reform and significantly reduced energy subsidies. Simultaneously, you know that the energy price increased 2 to 9 times, and also it leads to the monthly inflation increase in mid-2011. This energy subsidy reform has another important component, and many international institutions like IMF praise this as a good experience and a good benchmark for other countries, because government provided the cash transfer, monthly cash transfer of $45 per capita per month. And if we adjust this amount with purchasing power parity, it becomes $19, which is pretty high in that period. It was 28% of median income per capita, but as we said, the eligibility was only for Iranian, and 3% of population, non-Iranian residents, were excluded from this cash transfer. This is the brief background and the history of the reform. Very briefly, if we want to review the literature in this field of research, there is 2 lines of literature that we contribute. First line is energy subsidy reform and poverty that generated pretty mixed result in several countries. The key message of other countries' experience is if the reform doesn't include compensation pattern or complementary policy, poverty would increase. This is key message we receive from other countries' experience. Also, we contribute to the large and extensive body of literature which study early life circumstances and child outcome. And they show that even mild income shock could affect children's health. Early life period is very sensitive to income shock, and this can affect the later outcome. And there is very large literature about that. What we do is the contribution is in methodology. Many of the previous studies just use partial or general equilibrium effect. We use difference in difference approach to compare these two groups, use this setting, which is unique, and divide the population to two groups of cash recipient and non-cash recipient, and use difference in difference to evaluate their outcome. Also, none of the previous studies go beyond income and poverty. We investigate broad outcomes like household behavior, nutrition, and etc. In the literature of early life circumstance and child outcome, we also look at how household could affect, how this income shock affect household investment in children. And we provide suggestive evidence that the investment on children decreased. Let's briefly review the data set that we use in this study. Mainly, we use two rich data set from Iran. The first data set is household expenditure and income survey, which is annually collected by a statistical center of Iran, since here SCI, since 1960, and covering every year 38,000 household in province and country level. This is kind of representative sample of country. It is very rich in terms of, especially in terms of food. It provides the food expenditure, also the amount of food that they consume. The household report, in addition to the expenditure, the weight and the type of food they consumed over the last month. And this is one of the primary data set that we use. We conduct two analyses. In one analysis, we use 3 years before and 3 years after the reform. And to establish more causality, we make a panel between 2010 and 2011 to show that this effect is not just kind of descriptive, and this is more likely to be causal. Very briefly review this household expenditure and income survey for 2010 and 2011. As you see, we match the data set between 2 years because the survey is not designed to be panel. We match the data set between 2 years by some continuous variable, which is very likely to be the same in the 2 years. We use address, age of head, area of home, and match this 2 years data set for cash recipient and non-cash recipient. You can see that based on address, because even with the same address and household ID, the household would change over the years, unfortunately, because it is not designed to be panel. And if you look at the amount of food, you can see that we have nutrition, calorie that consumed based on daily calorie consumption in both two groups, amount of fat, carbohydrates, and protein that they consume over the base transformed to the daily pattern. Also, we have many socioeconomic data, family size, the ratio of married individual as well. In addition to the household income and expenditure survey, we have a rich health data set, which is a very interesting data set conducted by WHO in 2011-2012 across large worldwide cities, including Tehran. This randomized household survey includes 34,000 households and more than 100,000 individuals. We focus on children under age 7 or born after January 1st in 2004. This health data set includes height, weight, and also socioeconomic factor. The final sample of children includes 5,924 children, which is, as I said, about 3% of them are non-Iranian. Any questions so far? Okay. Comparing age and height of children in different age is kind of challenge. We use one standard method in biological and human biological studies that adjust this weight and height by their sex and the exact monthly age. And we calculate the standard deviation of change from the standard growth chart that you may be familiar. I can explain more details about this later. And if we look at summary statistics of this urban heart survey, we can see that we have two different cohorts. We divided data in two different cohorts. One cohort is for 2004 to 2009, and another cohort is 2010, 2011, which really highly exposed to the reform. As you can see, this is daily age based on the date of birth and date of survey. We can calculate exact age in day. Ratio of male, we have height of children. As you can see, the children are in two groups are pretty comparable, but you can see that there is some small change in the height. And to be fair, the non-Iranian in general are shorter than Iranian on average, as you see here. We have also weight, and we adjusted height and weight for the daily age and gender. Also, we can use many socioeconomic backgrounds like parents' education, parent job, district, and if they are homeowner or not. There is some complementary data. For example, I used the 2011 Iranian census data to show that this non-cash recipients are non-Iranian. If you are interested, you can see them in paper. I used the geographical variation in the ratio of non-cash recipient and ratio of non-Iranian, and we show that they are very likely, very highly correlated. Also, for adjusting some monetary value, we use inflation, and more importantly, we have nutritional tables. Link this nutritional table to household foods, their household reported foods to calculate the calorie, amount of protein, and fat for each household. About research design, as I said before, our research design is based on difference in difference comparison. Absolutely, we have two different data sets, and we need two different research design. For the household response based on data set in household expenditure and income, we use binary treatment if they don't receive cash transfer in the second year, and in the post year is for 2011. Including household fixed effect here and the year fixed effect. Also, we add bunch of control variables here. But for the health data set, as we don't have several years, but we have several cohorts in the data set. The data set collected in the end of 2011, and the ratio of overlap of each children with reform is very different. Those who was born after the reform exposed fully in the life, but this rate of exposure could be very different. I plot the variation in the rate of exposure and overlap with the reform in the paper. If you are interested, you can look at them. Therefore, for children health, we use the continuous difference in difference, and for the household response, we use binary treatment. Also here we have a bunch of controls, and we can evaluate the impact of reform on these two groups. Let's go to the most interesting part, which is the result. The first result is descriptive. Let's see what exactly happened during 3 years and before and 3 years after the reform for both groups. The panel A here showed the income distribution of entire sample 3 years before the reform, and you can see the ratio of real income per capita in US dollar for group that is, which is less than 2,000 is pretty stable before the reform. It is more than 60% of population has income below 2,000 per year. Why 2,000 is important? This is one of the threshold for poverty by calculating by World Bank if we consider 5.5 daily US dollar daily income per capita. We can see that this poverty rate is pretty stable before the reform. What would happen exactly after the reform for this 97% of population? You can see that the rate of poverty suddenly decrease based on income, based on 5.5 daily. This poverty rate suddenly decreased from 16% of more than 16% of population to less than 10% of population. And again, it is pretty stable after the reform. What about non-cash recipient? If you look, you can see that the ratio of poverty is much higher for this group, and it is increasing, which suggests that this group experienced very large income shock, and also the poverty rate simultaneously they experienced income shock, and the ratio of poverty is much higher. What about calorie consumption? Let's use the benchmark of 2,000 calories per day. Almost similar pattern happened for the calorie consumption of two groups. For example, if we use threshold of 2,000 calories per capita per day, we can see that again, 29%, 30% of population of cash recipient experience this kind of malnutrition, a standard measure for malnutrition, which consider 2,000 calories per day. But after the reform, you can see this calorie poverty decrease again to 26%, 28%, and slightly more in 2013. But what about the another group, non-cash recipient? We can see that they again experience very large amount of poverty in nutrition. The ratio is pretty higher again here. And they are very likely to experience malnutrition. If we use the intact panel of household and use the regression that I explained before, we can see even for the panel between 2010 and 2011, there is large income gap. The representative household in non-cash recipient household experienced 1.2 daily income drop. And this is about 70% of income, which is pretty large. If we use the measure of 5.5, also non-cash recipient experience about 12% more this poverty rate. This is again, in this model, we are using the only sample of 2010, 2011. Therefore, both descriptive evidence and the regression on intact households show that they experience large and negative, the non-cash recipients experience large and negative income and nutritional shock. What about children? The first evidence on children is descriptive again. We plot the height of children. If you see in this plot, we have height of children. This triangle shows the height of Iranian, and this circle shows the height of non-Iranian children. You can see in this plot. And if we fit the model to capture the height of different cohort by quarters from quarter 1 in 2005 to 2011 quarter 3, you can see that the gap between these two groups slowly increase over time, which again suggests that the more exposure to the reform, the larger gap between these two groups. If we use the more standard measure of comparison between two groups, which is height adjusted for age and gender, you can see here that the gap is more obvious here. Non-cash recipient, non-Iran, which is likely non-Iran, sorry, here we have non-Iranian. Non-Iranian, which is absolutely never received any cash transfer after the reform, experience drop in height of children. Again, if we use the regression, difference in difference regression, and compare non-Iranian interaction with overlap with the reform, we can see that the height of children affected. There is also impact on the weight of children, but it is not statistically significant, but this is suggestive evidence. Absolutely, the sample is very small, especially for non-Iranian. We have only 167 children. But on height, this is statistically significant. We add different controls and fixed effect, distinct fixed effect, if they are homeowner or employment. We control for daily age, sex, time of birth, many controls and fixed effect added to the model, and the effect is pretty stable over different specification. There is also another measure which is stunted children, which means that based on growth chart of children, they are below 2 standard deviation of a standard growth pattern, which is really important, and this is medic usually prescribe to do some treatment if observe that children experience below -2 from a standard growth chart. We also can see that here we observe as their height decrease, many of them go below this important threshold in medical science. We can also show this evidence by event study. If we use the event study, you can see that the difference between two groups is pretty stable for the previous cohort for 2004, 2006, 2008, and 2010. Here we have biannually cohort, which includes 2 years because the sample size is small. Also, I reported it in yearly pattern in paper, but since the sample size is small, it's better to use biannually, which includes 2 years. For example, 2010 times non-Iranian here shows the 2010-2011 cohort, which highly exposed. Most of them experienced the whole life after the reform. And also, as their height decreased, the probability of they become stunted increased a lot. What is the channel of income shock effect on children? How this income shock translated to the health shock? This is an interesting question. Absolutely, several mechanisms could generate this gap between two groups. More importantly, as we explained, we repeat the analysis on the income on nutrition, and we can see that in bottom of nutrition distribution, there is a change in nutrition. 40% change in calories detected on the intact panel of 2010, 2011. If we use the measure severe malnutrition, which is calorie below 1,500, again, we have significant impact for non-cash recipient. Also, there is negative impact for protein, fat, which is not statistically significant, which is suggestive, but for carbohydrate also, we can see that it is statistically significant. We do several other analyses to be sure about this food and malnutrition shock. I put them in appendix of paper. If you are interested, you can see them. We match these two groups based on several socioeconomic background, and we use some other questions, some qualitative question, not quantitative question, that how much you experience malnutrition, how many times you could not afford to purchase enough food during the last 30 times. And all of them show significant impact, even when we match these two groups based on several socioeconomic background. We use inverse probability weighting, and again, we find impact on the descriptive and quantitative measure of malnutrition between these two groups. The last suggestive evidence is health behavior of household could affect also children. Using the urban heart, which is really rich in health, we have some question about childbirth. How many times you did vaccination in time, how many, the ratio of children that was burned outside of hospital are available in the data. We also, despite the small sample size, we can also observe that the vaccination in time is pretty similar between these two groups, but the childbirth in hospital slightly decreased for the non-Iranian after the burn, immediately after the report. Yeah. And when we use the matching and weight the sample, we can see that it becomes statistically significant in 10% level. And most important part of this paper, as I believe, that is the part that show removing cash transfer from Iranian household would generate similar impact. Why? Let's do. We have the detail of income for each household. The final record exactly report the cash instead of energy subsidy. When we remove this cash instead of energy subsidy, we can see that the income distribution of this 97% of population without cash is pretty similar to the non-cash recipient. As you can see here, the ratio of poverty would be very similar, which suggests despite non-Iranian are usually from lower socioeconomic background, but we should consider that most of them live in urban area. Rural area in Iran are experience much more poverty without this cash transfer. Many provinces like Sistan, which is poor province, also have great poverty rate, and without this cash transfer, total population, 97% of population are very likely to experience similar income shock. This is, I think this is very important to be considered for policy making design if they want to do other rounds of reform in Iran or other Middle East countries. To sum up the results, we analyzed the impact of 2010 energy subsidy in Iran. We found significant disparities between cash recipient and non-cash recipient. It is not only in income, we show that calorie intake, and also in appendix, I show that also food diversity gap arose after the reform between two groups. The number of foods that cash recipient consume increased suddenly after the reform, but for non-cash recipient, we can see completely different pattern. And the counterfactual analysis show that in absence of cash transfer, 20%, more than 20% of cash recipient would fall below this poverty threshold, as I show in the previous plot. 20% are below this poverty threshold without cash transfer. And also children in non-protected household showed a stunted growth, especially those born around the reform. if we want to suggest two mechanism, malnutrition and also health behavior could be two suggestive mechanisms for this gap between two groups. And to sum up, we highlight the crucial role of cash transfer in protecting households against this economic shock, which usually generated after energy subsidy reform. This finding would be important for other oil exporters. Many of them, as I know, consider this kind of reform, and they usually have many immigrants in the population. I think this group also should be considered in the reform in other countries. Yeah, another important policy implication is the having a robust system for identifying low-income group in these reforms. If the country don't have a good identification system to recognize who is low income and who is not. For example, recently Iran eliminated many of cash recipients from this subsidy because they believe that they are in top income group. But absolutely, it is very important to detect them precisely. Yeah. Thank you so much. I am looking for your feedback and thank you for giving me this opportunity to present this research.
It is we who should thank you, Mr. Mokhtari. This was really a very important, very sophisticated paper and extremely well presented and explicated as well. If I may, I just want a couple of quick questions of my own before I open it up. In fact, folks, those of you who are in the audience, if you have questions for Mr. Mokhtari, you can, of course, raise your hand or you can put your questions in the chat box. But may I just pose one question? Most of the non-Iranians in your sample are Afghan, is that correct?
Exactly, yes.
Yeah, very unfortunate. And I was also wondering why at the end of your paper you suggest that your paper has implications for other oil-producing countries such as Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and Kuwait. Why did you choose these countries? I mean, these are very high-income countries. I'm not entirely sure about Kuwait, but certainly Qatar and Saudi Arabia. But I should think that the implications would be much more relevant to oil-producing countries like Algeria, Iraq, and then also non-MENA oil producers like Venezuela and Mexico, for example, or even Nigeria. So I wonder if you can just, clarify that. Thank you.
Absolutely. You're right. I have here, etc. But in the literature, I understand that these countries consider this kind of reform. This is only I wrote their name. But it would be important also for all countries with, especially for those with large immigrants. I think it's pretty important. In the travel that I did a few years ago in Qatar, for example, I understand they have very large amount of immigrants that working in the country, from many of them from East Asian countries, and they work in Qatar. I think they are very likely to be excluded from the cash transfer if the country want to distribute the national wealth. Absolutely, it's also be important for other countries. Every country that consider this kind of reform, I think its key message is the cash transfer is really important part. Yeah.
Very much so. Thank you. Thank you very much for that. Let's see. Do we have any? Yeah, we have a couple of questions. So Zahra Mila Elmi, two questions. Why do you use 2010 and 2011? And one more, why do you not use the pseudo panel? And for using the cohort, I think it is better to use a longer time. That would have been another question for me. Yes, thank you for that question. Would you like to take these questions one at a time, or shall I read all three?
It's better to answer
Mr.
before
Mokhtari?
forgetting. This is very important and good question. Why we consider
Yeah.
the 2010, 2011.
Yeah.
The one limitation we should accept is that here we don't have panel data on health. This is kind of cross-sectional data, but the exposure is pretty different between these two groups. Yeah, the large literature on child development show that the exposure in early life is much more important in utero period, and also the first year of life is very important in shaping the later outcomes. This is one point. And the second point is, if we only consider not waiting the last stage or early life, if we consider the ratio of exposure, also this cohort, this 2010, 2011 cohort, almost exposed more than half of the life to the reform. For 2011, whole life overlapped with the reform. For 2010, more than half of the life overlapped with the reform. As we come to the previous cohort, their exposure to the reform decreased significantly. I plot this, and there is large variation in the exposure to this reform. Yeah, why we don't go before 2004? Because they are not children anymore, right? There is other different stage in the life, and the literature of early life shows that usually the comparison group should be before age 5 or 6. In appendix, I think I add at least in the earlier version, I add previous cohort that show that they are pretty comparable, and there is no gap between cohorts before 2004. And there was another question as well.
There was indeed another question. Let me see. I'm sorry. Oh, why is my hand up? My hand should not be up. Sorry. Lower my hand. Sorry, where are we? Here we go. Daniel Rod. Do we have data on sanctions versus cash transfer fed into the early years lack of growth of children? On an anecdotal note, the severe shortage in baby formula in the market around 2012, 2014 has had a long-term impact. Yeah.
This is a very good question. Thank you. The point is absolutely several shocks in Iranian country, especially after 2000, should be considered, and they would have impact on outcomes. I really like to study other shocks impact, but one point is we have limitation in health data set. This 2011 health data set, this urban heart is really rich. Unfortunately, I couldn't find other health data set. Otherwise, I could have linked that to this. Yeah. And after 2011, I couldn't find rich health data set to evaluate impact of other shocks, especially sanctions. I think it's very important. Yeah. In another study also, we look at the impact of sanction and energy subsidy reform together on the inequality in Iran. What we understand so far is that, okay, the sanction affected Iranian economy a lot, but we couldn't detect any impact of sanction on inequality, which means all income group affected together. The impact of the sanction hits different income group proportionally, not differently. The impact of sanction on different income group, at least based on this household income and expenditure survey, we couldn't so far detect any heterogeneous impact of sanction on different income groups. Seems that group comes up and down together based on this sanction. Yeah, this is, I think, very important. If I absolutely also I encourage other researchers to, if they have access to any health data set, it would be very interesting to evaluate impact of exogenous, almost exogenous sanction on health of children in Europe.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yes. Very important indeed. Let's see. Hashem Pesaron has a question too. How representative is the control non-cash recipients group? How long-lasting are the effects of cash transfers? Another relevant similar question. Yeah, about length. Okay.
Thank you so much. This is very important and good question. In this paper, we focused on 3 years before and 3 years after the reform, and we showed this descriptive analysis. Then to approach, to establish more causal evidence, we used the intact panel only between 2010 and 2011. But what we find in other studies show that the impact of cash transfer slowly decreases over time. Since the inflation melt this amount of real amount of cash transfer over time, we understand that the positive impact of cash transfer, especially in bottom of distribution, decreased significantly over time, especially after 2013, which is the last year here. This positive impact slowly decreased a lot. Why? Because the amount of cash transfer was fixed, but inflation slowly diminished the real amount of this cash transfer. And it leads finally to increase in inequality in Iran. This is important subject of another study. We are working on that, and yeah, perhaps better for other session to present.
Thank you
so
for that. We have a question from Hossein Samii. Thank you for the nice seminar. You show the impact on poverty. I have 2 questions. First, the purpose of energy reform was to rationalize energy demand and prices, not improving poverty, except to compensate the impact on poverty through transfers. As you said, the transfer, indeed, there's a missing word here. The transfers must have been too high, as evidenced by the higher deficits and inflation. Okay, that's the first question. And the second, it seems you measure the immediate impact. Did you try measuring the long term? Yes, you're getting now 3 of these sorts of questions. Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much. Let's start from the last question. Yes, the last question, as I answered in another study, we look at the longer horizon and impact of this cash transfer on inequality. We use the continuous measure of sanction, control for that, try to control and rule out that sanction affected inequality too much. We show that this cash transfer explained more than 90% of variation of inequality in Iran. This is one point. And the first question was also important and right. Yeah, the several reasons should be the motivation of government and state to do this energy subsidy reform. We here only focused on one aspect, which is poverty, which is in the point that these energy subsidies are indeed regressive. They captured mostly by high-income group, not low-income group. In terms of justice, fairness, many things, this is very important to be aware of the consequence, poverty, inequality. Why? Because maybe they are barriers for the reform. We are not aware of the consequence of this shift from energy subsidies to cash transfer. And absolutely it needs to be studied more and more to understand any consequence of this energy subsidy reform. Here we focused on one aspect. Absolutely, we can also at other aspects of this energy subsidy reform. For example, even for Iranian, for 97% of population, we understand that the magnitude of this reform is heterogeneous among different income group in cash recipient group. This is also another topic that should be considered for later studies.
Yeah, I'm sure there are lots of implications and lots of research lines also from your study. I think this might be the final question from Masoud Karshanas. Can you say more about the matching of non-recipients and non-Iranians?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. Very good question. We have several socioeconomic background of two groups. If I find yes, we have parents' education, parents' job. We level them, for example, if they have only they are illiterate or only primary school, we assign level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4. Also for their jobs, their district, you know that districts in Tehran, which is the health data set comes from, have a large disparity in income. We have low income districts and high income districts, and also home ownership. Based on this different socioeconomic background, we match this two data set of Iranian and non-Iranian. The method is a bit complicated, but in a simple word, put different weight when they are similar in two groups. If the Afghan refugee or non-Iranian have more similar socioeconomic background to lower income group of Iranian, they have more weight. This is the intuition behind this matching. If you are more interested, you can see the paper. We put the details in the appendix. Inverse probability weighting and with regression adjustment. This is the name of methodological name of this kind of analysis.
Well, I think, if I'm not mistaken, there are no more questions.
Essie has a question about, but can ask directly himself.
Beg your pardon?
Essie has a question, and I'm going to also.
Yes.
I will also allow Masoud to talk because he's raised his hands, unless he's giving us a high five.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't see that. Okay, thank you.
All right. Can you
here we go. Yes, of course.
Okay. Thank you so much, soon to be Dr. Mokhtari, for a very thought-provoking
Thank you.
paper. I very much like the methodology, and certainly the subject matter couldn't be more important. I find the findings plausible in terms of direction of things. As usual, the haggling is about quantification. How much? Is it 10%, 20%? That's the sort of the relevance of most questions when one quantifies. So, some of my comments are just comments, and some are for clarification. Masoud already raised one of them about the selection of the matched population, the non-treated sample frame, as it were. For DID, there's the assumption of parallel trends, and this is a tough issue. I'm taking now for granted that your non-treated frame is the non-Iranians, mostly Afghan immigrants. The parallel trends, fully appreciated, regards a presumption that the two populations have very similar backgrounds before and after. It's not just what's going to happen to them in the future, but also what kind of human capital development and experiences. In a lot of treatment effect literature, earlier on, we we would omit prior, for instance, income or outcomes. And people found that that's very important to include. And here, I know it's very challenging because presumably all of the Iranian population that could qualify or potentially qualified. And so you have to go somewhere where people were definitely not qualified, but otherwise good matches. Right? That's the challenge. And so most of my question is about trying to do things to make the quantifications more robust. And I don't know that I have any ideas for you about how to do that. Ironically, I think the sheikdoms that Dr. Moghadam referred to might be a good place to try to do comparisons because they have massive populations of immigrant workers. In some of them, they have more than the residents, the numbers, and they're treated very differently. Even though they're working, that's why they're there, they have incomes, but it's still, they're very distinct. People are excluded from a lot of the welfare policies of these countries. So I'm basically raising issues about matching and inclusion of prior status of the to be matched non-treated population. I worry about that regarding the amounts. You've already addressed one of the points that I apologize for rambling on. I like you're finding that a lot of these treatment effects tend to dissipate over time. There is an immediate impact, and this dissipation could be due to the treatment effect itself, but also from the occurrence of many other shocks, like the sanctions, Obama period sanctions, which are very severe and international, came right after this period. And or about 2010, 2011, they were really picking up. And so there were lots of other stuff going on that make DID quite challenging in terms of its underlying assumptions. So my rambling was mostly to make those comments. If you have comments, responses, great. Otherwise, it's perfectly okay to just move on to the next questions.
Thank you so much, Mr. Masumi, as I understand, if I understand correctly. Yes, absolutely right. The parallel trend assumption is a very important part of this kind of studies. I think for health data, it's really evidence show that it holds. Since we have a survey with different cohorts, we can look at different cohorts, go back in time and test for that. And we did this well in the paper. If you look at, for example, this plot, you can see the difference between two cohorts. In previous cohorts, we cannot detect gap between two cohorts, controlling for everything, socioeconomic background and other stuff. But this is really important challenge for the household income and expenditure. This is very tough to acquire. Why? Because the data set is not panel. Therefore, we observe non-cash recipient after the reform. We don't have any information about them before the reform. That's why I try to match them and make a panel and use this intact panel between 2010 and 2011. And unfortunately, it is not possible to go back. I think for the health data set, it's pretty could be acquired here. It holds, but for the household income and expenditure, unfortunately, we cannot do something more based on limitation. We did the best with the data in the hand. Yeah, and the matching is just for robustness test. Here, without matching, we can observe the effect, and impact with matching is the same. I provide them as a robustness test. When we match the in children, again, the impact is completely the same. Nothing changed a lot in the magnitude and the direction of the effect. Thank you so much again for these good points.
Interesting. Yeah, the questions have been very thought-provoking. We have a question from Professor Karshanas as well. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much for your very interesting work and also your presentation.
Thank you too.
You know, I just want to elaborate my earlier question. You know, you assume that the non-recipients are non-Iranians. I just wanted to give you the opportunity to substantiate this. I mean, what is the evidence for that? It could be that the non-recipients may be in more remote regions, or they don't have bank accounts, they're very poor, etc., Iranians. So if you can say, you know, how do you basically identify non-recipients with non-Iranians? Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much for this good question. In the paper, since the time was limited here, I couldn't provide all evidence, but in the paper, I used the variation of non-Iranian in Iranian provinces. If you know, many provinces is prohibited for non-Iranian. For example, some provinces in the west of Iran, some provinces in center of Iran are completely prohibited for non-Iranian. They cannot live there. In the paper, we provide many evidence that show the distribution of non-Iranian in the country based on 2011 census, not survey, is very highly correlated with the distribution of non-cash recipient, which we have in 2011 again. Absolutely, this is not 100%, but I think this is really highly correlated. We cannot rule out 100% matching between non-cash recipient and non-Iranian, but I believe that first, because the variation and the data show this. Second, because absolutely non-Iranian are excluded based on the regulation and rules in the country. This is the point. We can say non-Iranian absolutely are subset of non-cash recipient, but we cannot say non-cash recipient are 100% non-Iranian. This is right. This is right and good point.
Wow. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
That needs. That would need to be clarified. You know, in the final version of the paper, of course. All right. I do not see any more hands, and I don't think I see. Oh, Mahmoud Meskoub. Thanks for a very interesting paper. As noted by Hossein Sami'i, subsidy reform was not about poverty reduction. Only in Clause 7 of subsidy reform law, the issue of compensation appears. Do you think subsidy reform should be used for poverty reduction, or do we need more general social policy measures on health, nutrition, and education? Frankly, I do not think cash transfers will be a comprehensive poverty reduction policy in Iran, simply because there won't be sufficient funds to maintain cash transfer at high enough level to reduce poverty. Interesting question.
Thank you. It depends. So far, we are looking at empirical evidence that we learned from this energy subsidy reform. It depends absolutely to other alternative that we have. For example, some study focus on investment, removing this energy subsidy reform and invest more in infrastructures. But evidence from other countries show that maybe the short-term impact of removing these subsidies is very large for low-income group. They are not patient enough to wait for this impact of infrastructure. Therefore, there is different kind of views in the literature. If you are really interested, there is very nice reviews we mentioned in this paper and look at different countries that implemented these energy subsidies and different outcomes. Also, World Bank has a very comprehensive paper for the categorized the countries in different group, different kind of reform, which published in 2023. They show evidence that in many developing countries, people are not patient enough for investing in infrastructure. And another point is the alternative, which is energy subsidy reform is not good idea. Energy subsidy reform is highly captured by high-income group and can make the poverty and inequality more and more severe in the country.
Yes, well, much to think about. Lots of research lines that can come out of this kind of work. Thank you very much, Mr. Mokhtari, for this very, very fine presentation. And thanks to everyone for the very insightful and incisive questions and comments. I would just like to point out that the next IIEA webinar will take place on the 12th of February at 1700 hours Central European Time via Zoom. And there will be two presentations, one by Behnaz Saburi, support for expanded government economic role among Iranian women. And the second presentation by Shayane Kermani, culture, female labor force participation, and occupational choices, evidence from Iran. We look forward to that. Certainly I do. And I must say, I found today's discussion just fascinating. Mr. Mokhtari, thank you so much, and all the best in your future endeavors. And if I may say, I wish you would apply to Northeastern and come to my university. I think the economics department would need somebody like you. And by the way, the big themes of our university happen to be health and sustainability, which are among your specializations too. So don't forget Northeastern Economics Department.
Thank you so much.
Goodbye to everyone, and see you next time. All the best to you all. Khuda Hafiz.